The last time Ida Layne felt completely safe, she was sitting in a classroom learning about birds. That was October 14th, 1992, a Tuesday. She was 10 years old, in the middle of copying down a fact about the migration patterns of the ruby-throated hummingbird. When the classroom door opened and her teacher looked up, and the expression that crossed that woman's face was something Ida would spend the rest of her life trying to forget. She didn't know it yet, but the life she'd always known had just ended 40 minutes ago on a wet Georgia road. A semi-truck, a yield sign, a fraction of a second that rewrote everything. Carl and Maggie Layne were gone before the ambulance arrived. Clover, Georgia in 1992 is the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your mama's name, and exactly which pew your family sits in on Sunday morning. It's a town of county fairs and front porches, of casseroles delivered to grieving households, of people who mean well and sometimes quietly, without realizing it, do the opposite. The October light falls amber through the pine trees, and on a good day, it's beautiful. On the day Ida Layne lost her parents, it was just light. Her father called her Little Professor. He said it the way some fathers say, sweetheart, like it was both a name and a whole philosophy. Her mother braided her hair every Sunday morning with the kind of deliberate, unhurried care that tells a child, without a single word, you are worth the time it takes. These were ordinary acts. Ida would not understand until much later how extraordinary ordinary can be, and how completely devastating it is to lose it. She moved into Aunt Patricia's house on a Thursday. 2 suitcases, a backpack, and a shoebox of things she'd grabbed from her bedroom in the hours before strangers came to close it up. Patricia Odom was her mother's older sister, church-going, practical, a woman who kept a clean house and strong opinions about the right way to do things. She agreed to take Ida in because refusing would have been a scandal. That's not an accusation. That's just the truth, and the truth matters here, because what happens to Ida in that house was never the result of dramatic cruelty. It was something quieter, something that left no bruises. Her cousin Cheryl was 11, 1 year older, 1 inch taller, and the undisputed center of Patricia's world. Cheryl was bright in the way adults could easily see: quick answers, neat handwriting, the right kind of smile at the right kind of moment. Ida was bright in a different way, interior, specific, the kind of child who collected strange facts and narrated her own life to herself in the third person. Patricia didn't know what to do with that kind of bright, so she didn't do much with it at all. August came, and with it, the back-to-school shopping trip. Cheryl came home with new jeans, new sneakers, a backpack with her initials on the zipper. Ida came home with a garbage bag of Cheryl's outgrown things and a gentle reminder to be grateful. She was grateful. She folded every piece neatly and put them away, and did not say a word, because she was 10 years old and she had no other option, and because some lessons are taught so softly that children absorb them as facts about themselves rather than failures in the people around them. The report cards came in November. Both girls' B+ averages, nearly identical. Cheryl's went straight to the refrigerator, held up by a little yellow magnet shaped like a sunflower. Patricia handed Ida hers back with a shrug and a, "That's fine, put it in the drawer." Ida put it in the drawer. She stood there a moment longer than necessary, looking at the refrigerator, at the sunflower magnet, at Cheryl's name written in blue ink at the top of a page that meant the same thing as hers, and then she turned and walked to her room. She did not slam the door. She never slammed doors. Christmas came, and with it, the family photographed grandparents' house. Everyone dressed up, the photographer moving people like furniture. Cheryl at the center, Patricia at her side. Ida placed at the edge, half behind an uncle, one shoulder already drifting out of the frame. Nobody did it on purpose. She would understand later that this was the cruelest part, that not a single person in that room meant her any harm. They just didn't notice. And in a family photograph, the edge of the frame and the absence from the frame are closer than people think. New Year's Eve. Ida lay in bed listening to Cheryl sleep, and in the dark, quietly, without ceremony, she made herself a promise. I don't need any of them. I will be fine. I will be more than fine. She was 11 years old, and she had just built the first brick of a wall that would take her 20 more years to dismantle. But here's what nobody tells you about a child who decides she doesn't need love anymore. What happens when love finally shows up and she doesn't know how to let it in? Here is the thing about a child who has decided she doesn't need love, she still needs it. She just stops showing it on her face. Ida Layne went back to school in January of 1993, wearing Cheryl's old jeans, carrying Cheryl's old backpack, and sitting in a classroom where nobody knew yet that she was a different girl than the one who had walked out in October. She had rearranged herself over the holidays, quietly, efficiently, the way you rearrange furniture in a room after something breaks. Everything still fit. Everything looked more or less the same. Only Ida knew that the room had changed entirely. She became extraordinary, almost by accident. Or maybe not by accident at all. When you are a child who has lost control of everything, your parents, your home, your place in the world, you find the one thing left that belongs to you, and you grip it like a lifeline. For Ida, that thing was her mind. She read everything. She memorized everything. She raised her hand in class not for approval but for accuracy, because accuracy was something she could control, and control was the only currency she had left. By 7th grade, she was at the top of every class in Clover County. By 8th, her teachers were running out of things to teach her. Patricia acknowledged this, the way you acknowledge whether a nod, a vague the kind of response that lands like a door closing quietly in your face. Cheryl was celebrated for the same grades Ida exceeded. Think about that for a moment. The same household, the same dinner table. Two girls, one whose achievements were pinned to the refrigerator like trophies, and one whose achievements were folded into a drawer like inconveniences. And the difference between them had nothing to do with merit. Ida understood this by the time she was 12. Understanding it did not make it hurt less. It made it hurt more precisely. Then came Mrs. Dolores Ware, 7th grade English, a woman who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had a habit of pausing mid-sentence like she was waiting for the words to catch up to her thoughts. She assigned an essay in October, write about something you notice that nobody else does. Most of the class wrote about sunsets, younger siblings, the smell of rain. Ida wrote 6 pages about blackbirds specifically, about how people flinch when a murmuration moves overhead, how they call it eerie or unsettling, when really what they're responding to is a kind of intelligence they don't have a framework for. Order from chaos, pattern from noise, something that looks like confusion until you step back far enough to see the shape. Mrs. Ware kept Ida after class. She set the essay down on the desk between them and looked at her over those reading glasses and said 5 words. You have a particular mind, not a good essay. Not well done. A particular mind. As though Ida was not a student to be graded, but a person to be recognized. Ida walked home that afternoon through the amber Georgia light and didn't tell anyone what Mrs. Ware had said. She kept it the way you keep something precious and fragile, close, quiet, private. She took it out when she needed it. She would need it often. But here is where the story tightens. Because surviving childhood is one thing. Surviving the first time someone your own age looks at you like you're worth something and then stops is another thing entirely. His name was Marcus Webb. She met him the summer she turned 15 at a regional debate program. 2 counties over a boy from Macon who argued like he meant it personally and laughed at things, Ida said, that nobody else found funny. For 3 weeks that summer, they wrote letters. Real letters, on paper, because neither of them had reliable access to the internet, and because there was something about the act of writing that felt appropriately serious for what they were doing, which was carefully, tentatively beginning to trust someone. Marcus asked what she thought about things. Not what she felt, what she thought. At 15, that distinction was everything. Then the letter stopped. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. The way a signal drops and you spend a moment tapping the screen before you understand it's gone. Ida waited 2 weeks before she stopped checking the mailbox. She filed it under evidence. Evidence of what, exactly? She couldn't have said, but some part of her already knew. She was building a case. She just didn't know yet who the defendant was. And then came the birthday party. Cheryl turned 17 in April of 1999 with the kind of celebration that Patricia had clearly been planning for months. The whole family came: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins from 3 counties over. There was a cake with Cheryl's name in pink script. There were photographs and toasts, and the specific, irreplaceable warmth of a family gathered around someone it loves completely. Ida's birthday had been 3 weeks earlier. There was a store-bought cupcake and a card signed in Patricia's neat handwriting. Dinner was spaghetti, which was just dinner. Nobody came from 3 counties over. Ida sat at Cheryl's party in a blue dress she'd bought herself with babysitting money and watched her family, because they were her family, technically, legally, by every measure that paperwork allows, and felt something she couldn't name. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. Something quieter and more dangerous. Something that sat behind the sternum and pressed. And then Patricia's sister, Aunt Ruth Ann, a soft woman with good intentions and the social awareness of a golden retriever, leaned over to Ida and said, with a conspiratorial little smile, "You know how she is about that girl, but I'm sure you're like a daughter to her too." The room kept moving. Music played. Someone laughed loudly across the yard. Ida smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am." Then she excused herself to the bathroom, closed the door, and stood in front of the mirror. She looked at herself for a long time, at the blue dress she'd bought herself, at the face that nobody had thought to put at the center of a photograph, at the girl who had spent 7 years being quietly, systematically, told without a single word that she was adjacent to this family but not quite of it. She looked at herself, and she made a decision. Not to leave? She couldn't leave yet. Not to confront confrontation required someone who believed they deserved better, and Ida was not yet that person. The decision she made was simpler and more devastating than either of those things. She decided to stop waiting. She had not known, until that moment, standing in her aunt's bathroom at Cheryl's 17th birthday party, that she had still been waiting. Waiting for the warmth to shift, for the refrigerator to get a second magnet, for Patricia to look at her one morning at breakfast, and finally see her. She had built a wall and lived behind it and told herself she was fine. And underneath all of it, in the place she never looked directly, she had still been waiting. Not anymore. She walked back out to the party. She ate a piece of Cheryl's cake. She smiled at Aunt Ruth Ann. She was impeccable, and something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. Ask yourself this: what is more damaging to a person, being hated openly or being loved insufficiently, in silence, for years on end? The answer lives in what Ida Layne did next. She graduated at the top of her class valedictorian, full scholarship to the University of Georgia, the kind of academic record that made the local paper, which Patricia clipped and kept, which might have meant something, except that Ida was standing in the kitchen when she did it, and Patricia didn't say a word, just folded it and put it in a drawer, the same drawer. After all these years, the same drawer. She left Clover that August with one bag, a bus ticket, and the posture of someone who has decided that survival is a solo project. She did not look back at the house. She did not cry on the bus. She watched the pine trees give way to highway and told herself she was free, and she was in every measurable sense she was free. But freedom and wholeness are not the same country, and Ida Layne had confused the border crossing for the destination. Atlanta gave her everything she'd worked for: a career, a reputation, a life assembled with the precision of someone who had learned, early and permanently, that if she wanted something done right, she would have to do it entirely alone. She became a high school counselor extraordinary at it, the kind of counselor that students sought out, the kind who could look at a quiet kid in the third row and know, without being told, that something was wrong. She could see the invisible ones. She had studied that particular darkness from the inside. She had relationships, good men, mostly, men who tried. But there is a pattern to the way a woman loves when she has been taught that love is conditional, and Ida's pattern was this: the moment someone got close enough to matter, she became convinced, on a cellular level, that they were compiling a list, evidence of her insufficiency, reasons to eventually leave. She couldn't see the list, but she knew it was there, so she ended things first. End quote. Clean, quiet, logical. She told herself she preferred her own company. She was very convincing. Then Patricia died. Heart failure, 71 years old. On a Tuesday in November the same month, Ida noticed that Clover always turned the most unbearable shade of beautiful. She drove back for the funeral and sat in the third row and looked at the coffin and waited to feel something she recognized. Grief came, but not the grief she expected. Not the grief you feel for someone you loved. Something stranger. Something that felt almost like a question left permanently unanswered. A book closed before the last chapter. A door that would never, now, open. She drove back to Atlanta that same night. She didn't stop for coffee. She didn't call anyone. But something had shifted. Something underground. The way earthquakes begin not on the surface, but in the deep, pressurized, long compressed dark. Ida Layne was 30 years old. She had built a perfect, impenetrable life. She had no idea it was about to crack open. And she had absolutely no idea that the person who would do it was already standing in her kitchen, making her coffee on a Sunday morning in March. So here is the question that nobody asks about a woman like Ida Layne Knott. Can she survive? She has already proven that, spectacularly, without anyone's help. But can she be loved? Not tolerated. Not admired from a professional distance. Loved, up close, in the ordinary, unglamorous, daily way that requires you to be seen without flinching. His name was Daniel, a quiet architect who drew buildings designed to let in as much light as possible, which, in retrospect, should have been her first warning. He didn't pursue her dramatically. He was simply, persistently, unhurriedly present the way certain kinds of patient people are present, like they have already decided and are just waiting for you to catch up. He laughed at the right things. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered the details she mentioned once and never repeated. When he said, "I love you," for the first time, Ida waited 3 weeks to say it back. She said it to his voicemail, alone in her kitchen, at 11 o'clock at night, because even then, even with Daniel, she needed to practice in an empty room before she could try it on a person. But Daniel asked one Sunday morning over coffee if he could meet her family, and something in Ida's chest cracked clean open. Not from anger. From the sudden, shattering recognition that she had built a life with no family to show anyone, not because she was alone. Because she had, brick by deliberate brick, made sure that no one could get close enough to matter. She was 30 years old and architecturally, comprehensively, lonely. She started therapy on a Wednesday in February. Dr. Yuwand Obi, a woman who asked questions the way a surgeon makes incisions, small, precise, and aimed exactly at the thing you'd spent years protecting. She didn't tell Ida what had happened to her. She asked Ida to tell her. And Ida, for the first time in her adult life, used the word unfair out loud. then hurt. Then, much later, in a session she almost canceled 3 times, the word grief, not for her parents, whom she had been permitted to mourn, but for the ordinary, specific visibility she lost when they died, for the Sunday mornings, and the hair braiding, and the father who called her little professor like it was both a name and a whole philosophy. She had never grieved that. She had skipped straight to survival. And the body, it turns out, keeps the receipt for everything you never let yourself feel. She had lunch with Cheryl on a Thursday. A diner in Clover. Sandwiches neither of them tasted. And Cheryl, now a grown woman with 2 children and a therapy degree, and the particular guilt of someone who benefited from a system she didn't design, said the truest and most insufficient thing anyone had ever said too. "Ida, I think my mother loved you. I just think she didn't know how." And Ida looked at her, across the table, and said, quietly, "I know." That's almost worse. They sat with that for a long moment. 2 women, in their 30s, in a diner, telling the truth. It didn't fix everything. It opened a door. Sometimes a door is enough. The last scene belongs to a 15-year-old girl named Kezia, a student sitting in Ida's office on a Tuesday afternoon, quiet in the specific way that only people trained in invisibility can recognize. Ida looked at her and said, with the full weight of everything she had carried, and was finally, carefully, setting down, "I see you. I want you to know that someone in this building sees you clearly." And saying it out loud to Kezia, Ida understood, maybe for the first time, that she had always deserved someone to say it to her too. She went to Daniel's family dinner that Saturday. She was nervous. She stayed anyway. Some people survive their childhoods. Some people survive them and then spend decades surviving the survival. And some people, the ones who do the hardest work, the ones who sit in the hard chairs and say the hard words and choose over and over to stay open. Some people make it all the way through to the other side, not unscathed, not unchanged, but whole. Ida Layne was one of those people. It just took her 30 years, one quiet architect, and a 15-year-old girl named Kezia to finally understand it. Now, think about someone in your own life who needed to hear, "I see you," and never did. Drop their name in the comments. You don't have to explain, just name them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for someone's story is simply acknowledge that it happened.